So I was talking to Mark from Excel Off the Grid a few days back, and I sat down with him over a Zoom call, and he showed me one of the amazing things that I have seen in the recent times. So this was a framework to build your reports and automate them using Power Query and VBA. And that is why I want you to watch this video till the end to learn that how you can automate your report and save hours every week. So let's get started. That's so true. Okay, let's start with something. I was talking to you about how you build a framework on to solve few things, generating VBA code. So let's show me something. How you use it. I mean, I'm really curious to know this.
Okay, let me share my screen.
Yeah.
It might take a few minutes because I need to talk you through it so you can then see how it all fits together. So this is something that I have worked on previously. So this is and hopefully you get to see it all working in action. Let me just share my screen. That's a good start. So I've got, this might take 10 minutes or so. It might take longer. If it does, I apologize, but hopefully it'll be interesting. So I'm going to go through this kind of framework that we cover inside our training academy, which kind of thinks about how do we solve Excel problems, and then how does VBA fit into that, and then we'll look at how you can kind of shortcut that using some elements of Chat GPT or other AI tools. So that's the plan. So effectively, it starts with this kind of this. This is our main framework. So this is what we call the reporting and analysis blueprint, which says that if we want to automate things inside Excel, we really want to go through this. It's a 7-step process. It starts with inputs, wherever our inputs are. We then reshape those inputs. That is primarily in terms of the way we think about it, in terms of Power Query. You then shape it into a data layout, so first normal form, so you can then calculate on it, and then you can visualize, okay? So if you think about I come from the finance world, so I'm going to use some finance terms here. If I have a trial balance, which is something that comes out from my accounting system, I want to reshape it into data, and then I can calculate to create a profit and loss account, for example. And that's the point where people can then analyze what they've got, and then they, investigate, they discover why numbers aren't what they thought they were. Is it in line with expectations? Maybe they need to speak to somebody in a certain cost center. Then they post to journals and adjustments, and that then goes back into their accounting system that then ends up being their input. So we go through this kind of 1 to 5 phase multiple times before we even then think about our numbers are ready. We can then think about how we present that and then distribute it. And in terms of presentation and distribution, we might be thinking about how we work with PDFs or Word or PowerPoint or Outlook, those kind of things. Now, the majority of this framework is actually when you go refresh. So you've refreshed something in Power Query, it goes into a table, the table automatically expands, everything recalcs. So you can pretty much go from points 1 to 5 in this framework just by going data refresh all, because Power Query then pushes through and does everything else. However, what if you want to refresh something but then send it out to your line manager? What happens if you want to update a PowerPoint presentation? What if you want to save down a PDF? That's the bit that we're now going to look at. So you end up with this process here that 80% of your kind of automated process is covered by your Power Query refresh, resize, and recalc process. But we have some VBA at the start and we have some VBA at the end. Now, how this works is I was talking to somebody it's a few years ago now. Charlie Young, he runs an engineering Excel website. And I explained my thought process about how I think about VBA. And he said to me at the time, it sounds just like the Unix philosophy. Now, I'd never heard of this before. And having spoken to him since, he now denies that he ever mentioned this philosophy, but I promise he did. So he effectively said, it sounds like the Unix philosophy, which I went away and looked at. And he said, and the philosophy is kind of summarized as this. Now, people have used Unix in the past, might say that maybe I've got this wrong, I don't know. But anyway, this was gold in my mind, okay? Because we need to write programs that do one thing and do it well. We need to write programs that work well together, and we need to write programs that handle text streams, because that is a universal interface, okay? So when we take these 3 principles about writing programs to do one thing well, write programs that work well together, and write programs that handle text streams, what we end up with, or what I ended up with, was what we call our automation toolkit framework, which is effectively where we have what I'm calling the automation machine. And this is kind of like an overarching thing that exists across lots of different actions. And what happens is that with our automation machine, we go down and we run the first action, and that then passes back up. We run our second action, our third action, our fourth action, and so forth. So this idea of this automation machine in this framework, I had around kind of 2015. So it's, in my mind, it's been around for about 9 years now. This is a very similar to how we see Power Automate on those other tools work. So let's say that what we wanted to do is to run out or create an automation machine that will open an Excel workbook, change a cell value, refresh Power Query that then causes that recalc cycle that then updates our profit and loss account. We save that Excel workbook, we save it as a PDF, and then we close Excel. Okay, that's the idea of what we want to do. So how that fits into this overall framework is that we have our first 3 steps: the open Excel, change cell value, and refresh Power Query. That then kicks off our refresh, resize, and recalc cycle. And then we come out the other end and we can then save Excel, save a PDF, and then close Excel. Okay, that's the premise. So let me just open up this folder and you can see the report that we're going to be working with. So here's this report, and it has a profit and loss account in there. Let me just change that date so it has some data in there. So it's reactive. How this actually, I shouldn't have changed it there. I should have changed it on our parameters page here. There we go. So we've got this kind of report that updates based on this parameter. And then we've got a profit and loss account, and then a year to date, and then a balance sheet. So just various reports. Now, let me close that for now. I won't save. So how do we build out this machine type thing that I'm referring to? Because it might sound quite strange at the moment. So in terms of VBA code, we have this magic piece of code, okay? I've just copied it in here just so it's easy, hopefully easier for people to read and me to highlight. So it starts off with, we're going to think about this example here, where we have a list of the actions that we want to perform. So we had open the Excel workbook, change the cell value, refresh Power Query, save Excel, save the PDF, and then close Excel. So we have these 6 actions are listed down the left-hand side. And then we have these kind of parameters that state, well, which workbook do we want to open? Which cell do we want to change? What workbook do we want to refresh Power Query in? What workbook do we want to save? If we were to save the PDF, what's the workbook called? What's the sheet called? Where do we want to save this PDF? And then we close our workbook. So they're kind of the steps that we want to undertake. So how this works is we've got some variables at the top. If you're used to VBA, we then say that, and we can set this up in lots of different ways. I've set this up just based on a cell selection. But effectively, we select whatever. So if I've selected the cell in there, that's the select in the current region. We then count the number of rows from that region. So having selected that cell, it's then going to look at that entire region and then say that I have 7 rows. And we then loop through all of those from row 2 until the 7th row. So we're then going to loop through each of those rows. And as we loop through, there's 2 things we get. First of all, we get the item from the action column, and we also get our parameters. So that's all the items in the parameters column, but we split them out based on a line break. So that means that our first item here just has 1 parameter. This cell here would end up with 4 parameters. So we end up with an array. Okay. Then all we do is we create this kind of rather large, so a select case, which is really just a big if statement. And we say that if our action, so this is just an example, if our action were to equal, so action name, in that case, we want to run a macro called subname, and then we have however many parameters that we need to pass across. So this is kind of the magic code that we want. This is the code that runs everything. So we were talking before, Puneet, about how even if we use ChatGPT, even if we use these tools, we still need some level of creativity to think about how we might even use this code or generate code and what we might use it for. So having now created this, okay, so this is a process that will just run down our cells and run whatever we ask it to. But what we need to do is to then fill up this process with all of those individual actions. Okay, so far we've built our machine, but we haven't got anything that then opens up an Excel workbook. So what we might do is go to ChatGPT. This is a real example. So I said, provide the VBA code for opening an Excel workbook, make the code reusable by including the parameters in the declaration of the sub. Do not provide any error checks. Obviously, in the real world, we probably would want error checks, but I just wanted to keep this simple so that it's hopefully easy for people to understand. And it gave me this code back. So sub, open workbook, file path as string, workbooks to open, file name, and then it gives me the file path. So if I come to my actual VBA code, let me delete that. So this is the code that it gave me. So this is now a reusable piece of code. I said it doesn't have any error checks in it, but it's a reusable piece of code that will open a workbook. Okay. So what I then need is the code that will then run that. So if my action in here, if my action is open workbook, okay, what's going to happen? So it's going to loop through this table. My action will be open workbook. So as it loops through, it'll say, is that item called open workbook? If it is, run my macro called open workbook, which is here, open workbook, and then it's going to pass across the parameter, which is the file name that I have over here. So it's then going to pass across that file name into this macro, and that macro will then open up that workbook. Okay, so in effect, just by asking ChatGPT, I've been able to create my first step or the first action that I want to perform. Then the next action that we want to perform is to change the cell value. So we come back and we ask ChatGPT, so it would have been a similar prompt to provide the VBA code for changing the cell value in another workbook. And it came back and it gave me this. So this is the code that we've then used. We've copied that across. So this is the code that it gave me. Let me uncomment that. And again, this is called change. This is ChatGPT's description, change cell value in other workbook. And it's recognized that we need a workbook name and a sheet name and a cell address and a new value. So if I then need a way of calling that. So let me just copy this here so you can see how this works. So that means that now when we loop this through, when it gets to change cell value, it's going to find that. It's then going to run the code that we've got from ChatGPT, and it's going to accept the report name, the sheet name, the named range that we want to change, and the value that we want to put into that named range. And all of these are driven by these parameters at the top. So we keep going through this process, and we can keep asking ChatGPT to please provide this, please provide that, and we can build up all of these steps. And let me just drop all of these in. So for each step, we just need a command, which means that now that we've built up all of these steps, when we come back, and this should work, so I've got all my steps listed. If I select in there, so the 31st of January, so what's going to happen? We're going to open the workbook, change the cell, refresh the data, save the workbook, save a PDF, and then close our workbook. So let's try this. I'm going to select it, click run. So open up that workbook. It's now running. It says it's done. So let's take a look to see whether it's saved a PDF. There's my saved PDF. So it's now saved that PDF based on the 31st of January 2023. So if I close that, and then let's say it's the next month. The next month we want to run it, and it's the 28th of February 2023. We can click that, we can click run. So you can see there the date for the parameters has changed. It's now going to create my PDF. It says done. We come across, have a look there. It's now created that PDF, and it's now the 28th of February 2023. So that means that we've kind of built up these 6 steps so that we can then run this process, and all we need to do is to change one thing. Now, the great thing is, because we've built up these 6 steps, when we come to another example, let's say this time we want to open the Excel workbook, we're going to change the cell value, refresh Power Query, save the workbook, save the PDF, then save an image as a PNG, then close Excel, then send an email. Well, we can reuse exactly the same steps as we had before because we've already built them up, which means that we only need to build 2 other steps into our overall process. So let's see if this works. On this is running for the 31st of March 2023. And there you go. It's now, so that's now created that email. It's got an image inside there with our PDF attached. So that's then created that action. And let's say you come across and you go, in the next action you want to create is that we don't just want to do that. We then want to, we've got an action where we want to open the Excel workbook, change the cell value, refresh Power Query, save Excel, open a PowerPoint, refresh the links in PowerPoint, change the text on the cover of the PowerPoint, save the PowerPoint, close it, close Excel, and then send an email with that PowerPoint attached. Well, we've got a lot of these steps already. We just need to ask ChatGPT to build out these other steps for us. Let me just run this for, let me just add some data. That's not the folder I want. Here's the folder here. So let's say it's now April. I'm going to copy that. I've got to save down my data into my folder. So I've just saved my April data. Let me run this for the 30th of the 4th, 2023. So I'm going to click that, click run. So it's going to run through all of that, run through all those steps. It's just connecting to the data source there because it's updating a workbook. In a moment, it will update, it will open PowerPoint and then refresh those links. There you go, that's PowerPoint updating. Let me click OK on that. Wow. I don't know whether that add-in has just broken everything. No, that's saved and closed. That's now closed. Then we should get an email with, so it says done. So then get an email with our PowerPoint attached, which if we look at that, then shows, it should. So that's now got our April data in there, which should work absolutely fine. I updated my version of Camtasia yesterday, and it's showing that option 2 in the add-in, so apologies for that. But that's now created that, right? So we've now, just by thinking about this, so we started off with this overall framework, then we thought about, well, how do we get the VBA pieces to work? And we thought about how we build this up. We then looked at about the VBA code. Now, this is the bit, right? If you ask, I can tell you, if you ask ChatGPT how you build up this process, it can't give you a good answer. Okay, but it's really good at small individual actions. If you say, how do I open an Excel workbook? It can provide you that. How do I change a cell in another workbook? It can provide you with that. So it's really good at those small individual actions. It's not good at thinking in a really broad sense. So we can take this a step further, and eventually you can end up building a tool that has all of these things already built for you. So for example, here I've got this same process that we've just seen. And I've got all of these actions that are available as a drop down. So, and all the actions we've got, so we can work with Excel, we can change cell values, we can refresh data, we can save images, we can run macros, we can hard code sheets. There's loads of stuff we can do. We can protect and unprotect. We can work with tables and workbooks and slicers. We can copy files and delete files, copy folders and delete folders, unzip, display error messages. We can send emails. We can We can do things in PowerPoint in terms of updating links, changing slide information. We can work with Word. We can do loads of stuff. So just as an example of how far you can take this, right?
Right.
So let's say we've got the same action here. So open the Excel workbook, change the cell value, refresh, Power Query, save the workbook, open the PowerPoint presentation, open the links, change the cover page on PowerPoint, save the presentation, close the presentation. Let's say we also wanted to PDF our Excel workbook. So this is the same basic process or framework, but all we've done is put a user interface into it. So let me add that in there. So save Excel PDF, I'll insert that action. I don't need that spacer row anymore. So now I can, what am I? I've got a method of creating variables here. So we'll say file name. And I want to save my, I think it's called profit and loss sheet. Where do I want to save my PDF to? Let's call that folder path. And then my PDF.pdf. So now what happens is that we've got this process again, and we've got all these steps already built out for us. So it's really quick to add and change our existing processes. So let's see if this will work. I'll click run on here. Now it should undertake those same actions as we just saw, but this is now in a tool where everything is built out and ready to go. So we'll just give this a few seconds to churn through. And again, this is all just based on that framework.
Yes.
You start with your framework, and then you just keep adding more and more steps. So we keep adding more and more steps until we have almost everything we could ever want to do. So this might just take a few seconds.
I think you can achieve anything. I mean, like when you go step by step, even if you have 50 different steps, this framework can actually help you to achieve anything. You need more testing though.
So it's there. Say that again.
I mean, you need more testing. I mean, in that case, like
testing is the biggest piece. So just one last thing on this. So we've got our, let's say you wanted to create a user interface. So helps if I get the date right. I won't click run on this again, but just so you can, if I didn't want my example process to be seen, I could hide that. And then when I click run, it's going to pick up that date. I'll click cancel. Oh, I'll click run now. It will run through that. Might be able to escape out. So that would then run that process for us without us even needing to show anybody all of those steps and all of those processes that work in the background. Then one last piece. Let's suggest that user interface is nice, but the other thing you'd really like is maybe you could create your own ribbon that had buttons that could then run these processes for you. So if I change these to true, so this is just a standard workbook. Now look at the top. Somewhere I'm going to get an ExcelChamps ribbon. If I refresh my ribbon, hopefully it should work. It's running a bit slow now, but we'll get an ExcelChamps ribbon that will appear. We should do. ExcelChamps, there it is.
Got it.
When I click that, I've got a button. I can hide that. So literally, I can now create this process where I click my button. It's going to ask me for my date. I won't click enter the date, but I could then enter my date, and that will then run that same process as I previously created. So all of this just comes from this basic idea of having this framework which we can build up these actions for. So anyone watching this, you can literally just take this code, take that code, link it up to a button, and then you build out your own actions in exactly the same way. So you've got all of your steps there and your individual piece of code. So all of this came from ChatGPT, all this code here. And that is how you can build up that using ChatGPT as a tool, but as you said, testing is the most important thing, because
Yeah.
it's if it's just a tool for you, then if you run into an error, it's not that big a deal, right? Because you hopefully you understand roughly what this code is doing. We've tried to make it so simple that if there's an error, you then generally it's an error in your workbook. The fact that you've labeled something incorrectly in here. So if I tried to open a workbook that didn't exist, if I called that report 1, it would then throw an error. So if it's just for you and you're the one working on it, then it's not too bad. You don't have to create a huge number of error checks. If you're building something for somebody else, then if somebody happens to just type in a date that doesn't exist or something like that, then yes, error checks are really important. So hopefully that was useful in terms of thinking about different ways that we can use ChatGPT to generate VBA code, and maybe a slightly different way of thinking about it, because normally people kind of think about it in terms of write me a macro that does a whole load of stuff. And I'm saying, no, let's break it down into small things, and then we can almost mix and match. So as you've seen across these kind of 3 examples, all we do is we start building up more and more processes. And over time, we build up an enormous library of individual VBA steps that we can put together in almost any way that we like.
That's so, I mean, so amazing, because I'm a big fan of, structuring your actual, what you actually want to do with anything. I mean, with VBA, Power Query, anything. I mean, the more you structure, the more you can actually add.